The bark came away in pale strips between her fingers, and Zane Keller watched from the edge of the clearing as the orc girl gnawed at it like it might contain some hidden nourishment her body desperately needed. He had been tracking the deer for most of the morning, rifle slung across his back, boots worn thin from years of military marches now carrying him through quieter forests. The war had ended 3 seasons ago, and he had returned to his family's abandoned homestead on the frontier with nothing but his service pay, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that sleep could not cure. The deer had led him deeper into the woods than he had ventured in weeks, and now the animal was gone, but something far more unexpected had taken its place. She was thin in a way that spoke of prolonged hunger, her green skin stretched taut over prominent collarbones. Her tusks were small, barely protruding past her upper lip, and her dark hair hung in matted tangles past her shoulders. She wore rags that might have once been a tunic and trousers, both torn and stained with mud and older bloodstains. Her hands trembled as she peeled another strip of bark from the oak tree, and when she bit into it, he saw her wince. Zane had killed orcs during the war. He had seen them charge across battlefields with axes raised and war cries that shook the ground beneath his feet. He had watched men he called brothers fall to orcish blades, and he had fired his rifle into green-skinned bodies until his hands cramped and his ears rang with permanent damage. The army had taught him that orcs were the enemy, that they were savages who wanted nothing more than to destroy human settlements and slaughter human families. But this girl eating bark did not look like a warrior or a savage. She looked like she was starving to death. He must have made some sound, because her head snapped up and her eyes locked onto his. They were amber, bright, and animal-sharp despite the hollowness in her cheeks. She dropped the bark and scrambled backward, pressing her spine against the tree trunk. Her lips pulled back to reveal her tusks more prominently, and a low sound came from her throat that was not quite a growl. Zane raised his hands slowly, palms out. "Easy," he said, keeping his voice low and calm. "I am not going to hurt you." She did not move, but her eyes tracked him with the wariness of something that had been hunted too long. He could see her ribs through the tears in her tunic, could see the way her legs shook even as she tried to hold herself in a defensive crouch. "When did you last eat?" he asked, though he suspected she might not understand his language. Some orcs did, some did not. The border territories had always been a mixed place, where languages and cultures bled together in messy, often violent ways. Her amber eyes narrowed, but she did not answer. Zane slowly reached into the satchel at his hip and pulled out the dried venison he had packed that morning. It was not much, just a few strips of salted meat, but he held one out toward her. "Here," he said. "Real food." She stared at the meat like it might be a trap. He could not blame her for that suspicion. He took a bite of another strip himself, chewing slowly to show her it was safe. Then he held out the first piece again, taking a careful step closer. "You are going to die if you keep eating bark," he said quietly. "That is not a threat. That is just true." She watched him for a long moment, her body still pressed against the tree, ready to bolt. Then her eyes flicked to the meat again, and he saw the exact moment hunger overrode caution. She darted forward, snatched the venison from his hand, and retreated back to the tree in one fluid motion. She tore into it with her teeth, eating so fast he worried she might choke. He pulled out the remaining strips and set them on a flat rock between them, then stepped back to give her space. She watched him with those sharp amber eyes, but after a moment she crept forward and took the meat, retreating again to devour it. "Where is your clan?" Zane asked once she had finished eating. "Your family." She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and said nothing. "You understand me?" Still nothing, but he thought he saw comprehension in her eyes. He sighed and glanced up at the sky. The sun was past its peak, and he had a long walk back to the homestead. He should leave. She was not his problem. He had done his good deed by giving her his food, and now he could return to his solitary life of fixing fences and trying to coax crops from soil that had gone wild during the years his family had been gone. But when he looked back at her, he saw the way she swayed slightly, even sitting down. He saw the infected scrapes on her arms, the bruises mottled across her green skin in shades of purple and yellow. He saw someone who would not survive another week alone in these woods. The war had taught him to see orcs as enemies. But the war was over, and he had come home to find peace, not to let someone starve to death within walking distance of his property. He took a slow breath and extended his hand toward her. "Come," he said simply. She stared at his hand like it was a foreign object. "I have food at my home," he said. "A roof, you can rest, heal, then you can leave if you want." He kept his hand outstretched steady. "But you will die out here, you know that." Her amber eyes lifted from his hand to his face, searching for something. Deceit, maybe, or cruelty. He tried to keep his expression open and honest, though he was not sure what honesty looked like anymore after years of war. Finally, slowly, she reached out and placed her hand in his. Her skin was rough with calluses and cold despite the summer warmth. Her fingers were longer than his, her grip surprisingly strong even in her weakened state. Zane helped her to her feet, and she wobbled, leaning heavily against the tree. He moved to support her, and she flinched but did not pull away. Up close, he realized she was taller than him by several inches, though her malnourished frame made her seem smaller. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded, just barely. "My home is about 3 miles west. We will go slow." She took a step, then another, each movement clearly painful. He stayed close enough to catch her if she fell, but far enough to give her space. They moved through the forest in silence, the only sounds their footsteps and the normal chatter of birds overhead. Halfway there, she stumbled over a root and went down hard. Zane caught her arm, but she still hit the ground on her knees. He heard her breathing go ragged, not quite a sob but close. "Let me help," he said, and before she could protest, he shifted her arm over his shoulders and took most of her weight. She was heavier than her thin frame suggested, all muscle and bone, but he had carried wounded soldiers through worse terrain. She resisted for only a moment before exhaustion won out, and she leaned against him. They continued that way, her steps dragging and his own beginning to ache by the time his homestead came into view through the trees. It was a modest place, a single-story cabin with a stone chimney and a small barn that leaned slightly to the left. The fields surrounding it were half wild, his attempts at farming still struggling to take hold. But it was home, and it had walls and a hearth and enough stored food to see him through the winter if he was careful. He helped her up the 2 steps to the door and pushed it open. The interior was dim and sparse, a main room with a fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, a kitchen area with shelves and a cast iron stove. A doorway led to a small bedroom in the back. Everything was neat and clean in the way of someone who had too much time alone with his thoughts. He guided her to one of the chairs, and she sank into it with a sound that might have been relief. Then he moved to the kitchen area and began pulling out food. Bread, cheese, an apple, leftover rabbit stew from the night before. He heated the stew over the fire while she watched him with those unnerving amber eyes. When the stew was warm, he ladled it into a bowl and set it in front of her with a spoon. She grabbed the spoon clumsily, her hands shaking, and ate with the same desperate speed as before. He poured water from a pitcher into a cup and set it beside her. She drank half of it in one go. He made himself a smaller portion and sat in the other chair, eating slowly while she finished everything he had given her. When she finally stopped, she leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes. Some of the tension had left her shoulders. "You can sleep in the bedroom," Zane said. "I will take the floor out here." Her eyes opened, and she looked at him with something that might have been suspicion or might have been confusion. He pointed to the bedroom door. "Bed for you." "I will stay here." He gestured to the floor to make his meaning clear. She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. She stood, still unsteady, and he guided her to the bedroom. It held only a simple bed frame with a straw mattress and wool blankets, a small trunk, and a window with shutters. She looked at the bed like she had not seen one in a very long time. "Rest," he said. "You are safe here." She turned to look at him, and for the first time she spoke. Her voice was hoarse and rough, but the words were clear. Why? It was a reasonable question. He was human, she was an orc. They had been enemies for generations. He had no logical reason to bring her into his home. "Because no one should starve to death alone in the woods," he said simply. She studied his face for another moment, then turned away and lowered herself onto the bed. She curled onto her side, pulling one of the blankets over herself, and within minutes, her breathing had evened into sleep. Zane closed the door quietly and returned to the main room. He sat at the table for a long time, staring at nothing, wondering what he had just gotten himself into. The next morning, he woke to find her still asleep. He kept his movements quiet as he started a fire in the hearth and made porridge with oats and dried berries. The sun was fully up by the time he heard movement from the bedroom. She emerged slowly, blinking in the light, her hair even more disheveled than before. She looked at him, then at the pot of porridge, then back at him. "Hungry?" he asked. She nodded. He served her a generous portion and watched as she ate, still too fast, but not quite as desperately as the night before. When she finished, she set down the bowl and looked at him expectantly, like she was waiting for him to tell her what came next. "I am Zane," he said, pointing to himself. "Zane Keller." She hesitated, then touched her own chest. "Grenna." "Grenna," he repeated, and she nodded. "You can stay here while you heal," he said. "There is food, water, a roof. When you are strong enough, you can decide what you want to do, go back to your clan or go somewhere else. Your choice." She frowned slightly, like she was processing his words, then nodded again. Over the next few days, they fell into a cautious routine. Grenna slept most of the first 2 days, her body demanding the rest it had been denied. When she was awake, she ate and watched him with careful eyes. Zane went about his work tending the small vegetable garden he had managed to coax into existence, repairing the barn's sagging wall, checking his snares for rabbits. He brought her food at regular intervals and gave her space otherwise. On the 3rd day, he found her standing in the doorway of the cabin, looking out at the fields. She had washed her face and attempted to comb her hair with her fingers. The worst of the dirt was gone, and he could see that her green skin had a warmer undertone where it was clean. "Feeling better?" he asked, coming up beside her with a bucket of water from the well. "Yes," she said. Her voice was still rough but stronger than before. "Good, you were in bad shape." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You were a soldier." It was not a question. He supposed his bearing made it obvious, or perhaps she had seen the old uniform folded in the trunk in the bedroom. "I was," he confirmed. "The war ended and I came home. You killed orcs." He set down the bucket and met her eyes. "I did." She nodded slowly, like this confirmed something she had already suspected. "And now you feed one." "The war is over," he said. "I am tired of killing, I just want to live quietly." "Orcs and humans do not live together," she said. "Not quietly, not anyway, maybe not. But you needed help and I was there." He picked up the bucket again. "You do not have to stay. Like I said, when you are healed, you can leave." She turned her gaze back to the fields, and he thought he saw something complicated pass across her face. "I have nowhere to go." He did not ask why. He suspected the answer would be painful. That afternoon, he was working in the garden when he heard footsteps behind him. Grenna had come outside, moving slowly but with more steadiness than before. She looked at the rows of struggling vegetables, then at the tools leaning against the fence. "I can help," she said. He glanced up, surprised. "You should rest." "I have rested. I can help." Her tone was firm, almost stubborn. He considered arguing but decided against it. If she wanted to feel useful, who was he to stop her? He handed her a hoe and showed her which plants were weeds. She took to the work with a focused intensity, her movements becoming more confident as she went. They worked side by side in the garden until the sun began to set. When they went back inside, she looked tired but in a satisfied way, like she had accomplished something. They ate a simple dinner of bread and vegetable soup, and for the first time, the silence between them felt less like weariness and more like simple quiet. As the days passed into weeks, Grenna grew stronger. The hollows in her cheeks filled out and her ribs became less prominent. The infected scrapes on her arms healed, leaving faint scars across her green skin. She took on more of the work around the homestead without being asked, hauling water from the well, feeding the chickens Zane kept in the barn, mending tears in old fabric with surprising skill. She did not talk much, but she answered when he asked questions. She had been cast out from her clan for helping a human child who had wandered into orc territory. Her family had not protested her exile. She had been alone in the woods for nearly 2 months before Zane found her. She did not know if her clan would take her back, and she was not sure she wanted to try. Zane shared his own story in pieces. His family had abandoned the homestead when the war started, fleeing to a safer settlement deeper in human territory. His parents had died of fever during the conflict, and his younger sister had married and moved west. The homestead had been empty for 5 years before he returned to it, drawn by the need for solitude and the hope that he could build something simple and good away from the memories of battle. "You are lonely," Grenna observed one evening as they sat on the porch steps, watching the fireflies begin their dance across the darkening fields. "I suppose I am," Zane admitted. He had not wanted to think of it that way, but she was right. The silence that had seemed peaceful at first had begun to feel heavy. "Me too," she said quietly. He glanced at her, and she was looking out at the fields with an expression that was hard to read. The last rays of sunlight caught in her dark hair, and he noticed for the first time that her eyes had small flecks of gold in them. He looked away, uncomfortable with the direction of his thoughts. Summer began to shift toward autumn, the nights growing cooler and the leaves starting to change. Zane taught Grenna how to preserve vegetables for the winter, and she taught him the words for things in her language, words that sounded harsh and guttural to his ear, but held a strange beauty in the way she spoke them. They harvested the garden together, their movements synchronized after weeks of working side by side. The barn wall was repaired, the chickens were fat and healthy, and the fields looked better than they had in years. One morning, Zane went to check his snares and found that something larger than a rabbit had been through them. The traps were destroyed, torn apart with deliberate force. He followed the tracks and found bootprints in the soft earth near the forest edge, human bootprints, more than one set. He returned to the homestead to find Grenna hanging laundry on the line he had strung between 2 posts. She looked up as he approached, and whatever she saw in his face made her go still. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Someone has been near the property," he said. "Humans, more than one." "They destroyed my snares." Her expression hardened. "They know I am here, maybe, or they are just passing through." "Humans do not just pass through when they see an orc," she said flatly. They gather weapons and gather others. They hunt. He wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. The war might be over, but that did not mean the hatred had ended. An orc living on a human homestead would be seen as a threat, or at best an abomination. "You should go," Grenna said, her voice carefully neutral. "Into the village. See what people are saying. If they are coming, you need to know. I am not leaving you here alone. I can defend myself. Not against a mob." He met her eyes. "We will figure this out, but I am not abandoning you." Something flickered across her face, too quick for him to identify. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. Zane went into the village the next day, his rifle slung across his back more for show than anything else. The village was small, just a collection of buildings clustered around a crossroads where traders and travelers sometimes stopped. He knew some of the people there from his childhood, though he had not made much effort to reconnect since his return. He bought supplies at the general store, listening to the conversations around him. It did not take long to hear what he needed to hear. "Orc been seen out near the Keller place," someone said, an older man Zane vaguely remembered as a farmer. "Scavenging, probably, or scouting for a raid." "Someone should do something before it brings more of them," a woman agreed. "That Keller boy is back there, isn't he?" another voice asked. "Someone should warn him." Zane finished his purchases and left without commenting. His hands were tight on the reins of his horse as he rode back to the homestead, his mind working through options. When he arrived, Grenna was sitting on the porch with a knife in her hands, sharpening it with a whetstone. She looked up as he dismounted. "They are planning something," she said. It was not a question. "Not yet, but they will be." He tied the horse and climbed the steps to sit beside her. "They think you are a threat. They do not know you are living here. They think you are scavenging or scouting. If they find out I am living here with you, they will come for both of us," she said. "Then we do not give them a reason to come." She stopped sharpening the knife and looked at him. "You cannot protect me from an entire village. I can try." "Why?" Her voice was fierce, almost angry. "Why would you risk everything for me? I am no one to you, just an orc you found in the woods." "You are not no one," Zane said. The words came out more intense than he intended. "You are someone who helps a lost child even when it costs you everything. You are someone who works hard and does not complain and has more courage than most soldiers I served with. You are—" He stopped, realizing he was saying too much. She was staring at him, her amber eyes wide. "You are my friend," he finished, though the word felt insufficient. "And I am not letting anyone hurt you." She was quiet for a long moment, then said softly, "You are my friend too." They sat together as the sun set, and Zane felt the weight of what was coming settle over them like a storm cloud. The confrontation came a week later. Zane was chopping wood behind the cabin when he heard the sound of horses and voices. He set down the axe and walked around to the front, where 5 men on horseback had stopped in his yard. He recognized a few of them neighbors from nearby homesteads, a man from the village who worked as a blacksmith. Grenna stepped out of the cabin behind him, and he heard the sharp intake of breath from the men. One of them reached for the rifle strapped to his saddle. "Easy," Zane said, his voice calm but carrying. "No one needs to draw weapons." "That is an orc, Keller," the blacksmith said, pointing at Grenna. "Living in your house. She is a guest," Zane said, "and she is not a threat to anyone." "Orcs are always a threat," one of the other men said. "We fought a war over it." "The war is over," Zane said, "and she is not a soldier. She is just trying to survive." "She needs to leave," the blacksmith said. "This is human land. Orcs do not belong here." "She stays as long as she wants," Zane said, his tone hardening. "This is my property and I decide who is welcome on it." "You are harboring the enemy," another man said. "That makes you a traitor." "I am harboring a person who needed help," Zane shot back. If that makes me a traitor, then I am fine with that." The men exchanged glances, and Zane saw the calculation in their eyes. They had expected him to be reasonable, to see their point of view. They had not expected him to choose an orc over his own kind. "You have until tomorrow to get her gone," the blacksmith said. "After that, we will come back, and we will not be asking." They turned their horses and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the air. Zane turned to find Grenna standing rigid, her hands clenched into fists. "You should not have done that," she said. "What was I supposed to do? Hand you over to them?" "Yes." Her voice rose sharp and pained. "You should have told them I would leave. You should have protected yourself." "I do not want to protect myself if it means giving you up." She stared at him, her tusked mouth slightly open in shock. Then she shook her head and turned away, walking back into the cabin. He followed her inside and found her pacing in front of the fireplace. "I will leave tonight," she said. "I will go deep into the forest where they will not find me. You can tell them I ran away. You will starve again, or freeze when winter comes. Better that than getting you killed. I am not letting you go." He said it with a finality that surprised even himself. She stopped pacing and turned to face him fully. "Why are you being so stubborn about this?" "Because I care about you." The words burst out of him before he could stop them. "Because the thought of you alone in the woods again makes me feel sick. Because I look forward to seeing you every morning, and I worry when you are out of my sight, and I do not know when that started, but it is true, and I cannot just let you go." The silence that followed was deafening. Grenna stared at him with an expression he could not read, her green skin darker in the firelight. "You care about me," she repeated slowly. "Yes, even though I am an orc. I do not care that you are an orc. I care that you are you." She crossed the space between them in 2 long strides, and for a moment he thought she might hit him. Instead, she reached up and placed one hand against his cheek, her touch surprisingly gentle. "I care about you too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I should. More than is safe." He lifted his own hand to cover hers, holding it against his face. "Then we will find a way to be safe together." "How? They will come back. They will bring more people. They will not stop until one of us is dead or gone." "Then we leave," he said. "Both of us. We go somewhere they cannot follow." "Where?" "There is nowhere that will accept us. Then we make our own place. Deeper in the frontier, away from villages and people who hate for no reason. We build something new." She searched his face, her amber eyes reflecting the firelight. "You would give up your home for me. This house is just wood and stone. You are," he struggled for the right words, "you are the first thing that has felt like home since I came back from the war." She made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then she was kissing him. Her tusks pressed against his lips, unfamiliar but not uncomfortable, and her mouth was warm and desperate. He kissed her back, one hand tangling in her dark hair, the other wrapping around her waist to pull her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "We will leave tomorrow," she said, "before they come back." "Tomorrow," he agreed. They spent that night preparing. Zane packed everything essential: food, tools, blankets, his rifle, and ammunition. Grenna moved with quick efficiency, her military instincts from her clan days clearly still intact. They worked by lamplight, and every so often one of them would glance at the other and share a small, private smile. As dawn approached, they loaded the horse with their supplies. Zane took one last look at the cabin, the fields he had worked so hard to restore, the barn with its repaired wall. Part of him ached to leave it behind, but when he looked at Grenna waiting beside the horse, her eyes bright with determination and something that might have been hope, the ache faded. They walked the horse through the pre-dawn darkness, heading north toward the deeper wilderness. Behind them, Zane knew the village would wake to find them gone. The men would come to the homestead and find it empty. They might search for a while, but the frontier was vast, and people disappeared into it all the time. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they stopped at the top of a ridge to look back. The homestead was just a small shape in the distance now, barely visible through the trees. "Any regrets?" Grenna asked. Zane looked at her, at the way the morning light caught the strong lines of her face, at the smile playing at the corners of her mouth despite everything they were leaving behind. "None," he said. They walked on. The journey north was harder than either of them had anticipated. The frontier beyond the settled areas was wild and unforgiving, with dense forests that fought their passage and rivers that had to be carefully crossed. Game was scarce in places, abundant in others. They rationed their supplies carefully and supplemented with what they could hunt or forage. Grenna proved to be better at wilderness survival than Zane had expected. She knew which plants were safe to eat, how to find water even when there was no obvious stream nearby, how to read the signs that indicated predators in the area. He realized that despite her time starving alone, she had skills that had kept her alive far longer than most would have lasted. They talked as they traveled, sharing stories about their lives before they met. Grenna spoke about growing up in her clan, about the complicated politics and the constant pressure to prove herself as a warrior. She had never quite fit the mold they wanted, too curious about the world beyond orc territory, too willing to question the old hatreds. Zane told her about his childhood on the homestead, about his parents who had been kind but worn down by the hardship of frontier life. He talked about the war, though those stories came harder. She listened without judgment, and when his words failed, she would reach over and take his hand. At night, they would make camp and sit close to the fire. The first few nights they slept separately, a careful distance maintained even as they acknowledged what they felt. But on the fifth night, when the temperature dropped and frost formed on their bedrolls, Grenna moved closer to him without a word. He wrapped his arms around her, and they slept tangled together, sharing warmth and something more than warmth. 3 weeks into their journey, they reached a valley that seemed untouched by human or orc civilization. A clear river ran through the center of it, and the land was flat enough for farming but surrounded by hills that would make it difficult for anyone to stumble upon by accident. Trees grew thick on the hillsides, promising good hunting and plenty of timber. "This could work," Zane said, standing at the valley's entrance and looking out over the land. Grenna stood beside him, her eyes scanning the area with a tactical precision that reminded him she had once been a warrior. Good water, good defensive position, plenty of resources. Yes, this could work. They spent the next 2 days exploring the valley, confirming that it was as uninhabited as it appeared. They found a spot near the river where the ground was flat and slightly elevated, reducing the risk of flooding. It was there that they decided to build. The work was backbreaking. They had brought tools, but everything had to be done by hand. They felled trees and trimmed them into logs, dug foundations into the hard earth, hauled stones from the river to create a hearth. Zane's military discipline and Grenna's clan training meant they both knew how to work through exhaustion. But there were days when they collapsed into their temporary shelter, a lean-to made of branches, and their canvas tent too tired to do more than eat and sleep. But slowly, day by day, the cabin took shape. It was smaller than Zane's old homestead, just one room with a loft for sleeping, but it was solid. The walls were straight, the roof was tight, and the stone fireplace drew properly. When they finally moved their belongings inside, Grenna stood in the center of the room and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "We built this," she said, and there was wonder in her voice. We did, Zane agreed. He was standing in the doorway, watching her with a smile he could not quite suppress. She turned to face him, and her expression was so full of happiness that it made his chest ache. This is ours. No one can tell us to leave. No one can say we do not belong. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, and she held him just as tightly. They stayed like that for a long time, just breathing together in their own home. As autumn deepened, they worked to prepare for winter. They hunted and smoked meat, preserved berries and roots, stacked firewood against the cabin's exterior wall until it formed a barrier taller than Zane. Grenna used animal hides to make warmer clothing, her hands moving with practiced skill. Zane reinforced the barn they had built for the horse, and the chickens they had managed to catch and domesticate from wild stock. The first snow came in late autumn, a light dusting that melted by midday. They stood outside the cabin and watched the flakes fall, and Grenna caught one on her finger, studying it with the fascination of someone who had rarely seen snow in her southern clan lands. "It is beautiful," she said. "It is cold," Zane countered, but he was smiling. "You humans and your hatred of cold," she teased, her breath fogged in the air. "Says the orc who is wearing 2 layers of furs." She laughed, the sound bright and unguarded, and tackled him into the light snow. They wrestled, more playful than serious, until they were both breathless and covered in melting flakes. When they finally stopped, Grenna was pinning him to the ground, grinning down at him with her tusks fully visible. "I win," she declared. "You always win," he said, reaching up to brush a wet strand of hair from her face, her grin softened into something more tender. "Not always. But when I am with you, I feel like I have won something important." He pulled her down and kissed her, tasting snow and warmth and the future they were building together. Winter settled in with a fierce intensity. The snow fell heavy and often, piling in drifts around the cabin. They spent long days inside, tending the fire and working on small projects. Grenna carved wooden bowls and spoons. Zane repaired tools and made plans for expanding their garden in the spring. At night, they would climb to the loft and burrow under the furs, their bodies pressed together as much for comfort as warmth. It was during those long winter nights that they talked about the deeper things. Grenna spoke about the pain of being cast out, the feeling that she had failed her family by being too soft, too human in her sympathies. Zane talked about the guilt he carried from the war, the faces of orcs he had killed that sometimes still haunted his dreams. "You regret it?" she asked one night, her voice quiet in the darkness. "Killing my people." He was silent for a long time. "I regret that the war happened. I regret that we were taught to hate each other. But in the moment in battle, I did what I had to do to survive. I cannot regret that, even though I wish it had been different." "That is honest," she said. "Does it bother you, being with someone who has orc blood on his hands?" She turned to face him, her eyes catching the faint glow from the banked fire below. "You also have human blood on your hands, I am sure. War is war. But you are not that person anymore. You are the person who gave me food when I was starving, who built me a home, who looks at me like I am something precious. That is who you are now." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You are precious," he murmured against her skin. "The most precious thing I have ever had." She held him tighter, and they fell asleep wrapped in each other and the knowledge that whatever they had been before, they were something new now. Spring came slowly, the snow melting in grudging increments. When the ground finally thawed, they began working the land. Grenna had saved seeds from various plants they had foraged, and Zane had brought seeds from his old homestead. They planted rows of vegetables, herbs, even a few experimental crops that might or might not survive in this northern valley. One morning, as they were working in the garden, Grenna suddenly went still. Zane looked up from the row he was planting to see her staring toward the valley entrance. "What is it?" he asked, reaching for the knife at his belt. "Someone is coming," she said. Her voice was calm, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. He stood and looked where she was looking. In the distance, he could see figures on the ridge, 3 of them, moving slowly down into the valley. His hand tightened on the knife. "Get inside," he said. "No," her voice was firm. "We face this together." They stood side by side as the figures approached, and as they got closer, Zane felt his confusion grow. These were not human villagers coming to drive them out. They were orcs, 2 women and a man, all carrying packs and looking travel-worn. Grenna made a sound of recognition. "Vara." She called out, her voice carrying across the distance. One of the orc women raised a hand in greeting, and they quickened their pace. When they reached the cabin, the woman Grenna had called Vara dropped her pack and stood looking at Grenna with an expression that was equal parts relief and uncertainty. "We heard you were alive," Vara said in the orcish language. Zane had picked up enough words over the winter to follow the conversation roughly. "We came to find you." "Why?" Grenna asked. She had not moved from Zane's side. "Because we were wrong," the male orc said. He was younger, with broad shoulders and scars across his arms. "The clan was wrong to cast you out. Some of us have felt that way for a while, but we were afraid to speak." "Things have been bad since you left," the other woman added. She was older, with streaks of gray in her dark hair. "The clan has become more extreme, more violent. Some of us could not stay. So you left." Grenna's voice was carefully neutral. "We were exiled too when we spoke against the clan leaders," Vara said. "We have been looking for you for 2 months. We thought if we could find you, maybe we could start something new, something better." Grenna looked at Zane, a question in her eyes. He understood what she was asking. This was their home, their sanctuary. Could they risk sharing it with others? But he also understood loneliness, and he understood the need for community. He nodded slightly. Grenna turned back to the other orcs. "This is Zane," she said, switching to the common tongue so he could fully understand. "He is my partner. We built this place together. If you stay, you will treat him with the same respect you would treat me. He is not human or orc here. He is just Zane. Can you accept that?" The 3 orcs looked at Zane, and he saw the same calculation he had seen in the human villagers months ago. But where the humans had seen only threat, these orcs seemed to see possibility. "We can accept that," Vara said. "We came here looking for a new way to live. If that means living alongside a human, then we will learn." Over the following weeks, the valley settlement grew. The 3 new arrivals built their own cabin with help from Zane and Grenna, and they worked together to expand the gardens and hunting territory. It was not always easy. Cultural differences led to misunderstandings, and old prejudices sometimes surfaced in moments of stress. But slowly, carefully, they built something that worked. More came as word spread through hidden channels. An elderly human couple who had lost their farm to debt and had nowhere else to go. A young orc woman fleeing an arranged marriage. A human man who had been wounded in the war and found no place for himself in the peace. Each arrival was carefully considered, and each was told the same thing: this was a place where old hatreds had no power, where what mattered was your willingness to work and your ability to live in peace with others. By the time summer arrived, the valley held 7 cabins and 20 residents. They established rules together, a blend of human and orc customs that created something new. They shared resources, defended each other, and slowly began to trust. Zane and Grenna's cabin remained at the heart of it all, both literally and figuratively. People came to them to settle disputes, to ask advice, to share news. They had become leaders without intending to. simply because they had been first, and because their partnership demonstrated what was possible. One warm evening, as the valley residents gathered for a communal meal, a tradition they had started to build community, Vara approached Zane and Grenna where they sat together on a log bench. "There is talk," Vara said without preamble. "Some want to formalize what we have here. Create a proper settlement with laws and agreements." "What do you think?" Grenna asked. Vara smiled. "I think we have already created something extraordinary. I think we should make it official so that others know this place exists. So that more people who do not fit in the old world can find their way here." Zane and Grenna exchanged a look. They had come here seeking only to escape, to build a quiet life for themselves. But what they had built had become larger than them. "Let us talk to everyone," Zane said. "This should be a decision we all make together." The meeting happened 2 days later, with all 20 residents gathered in the largest clearing. They talked for hours, voices sometimes raised in disagreement but always respectful. In the end, they agreed they would formalize the settlement, create written rules, and send word to other places that there was a valley in the north where humans and orcs lived together in peace. They decided to call it Haven Valley. More came over the following months. Some stayed, some left when they realized the reality was harder than the dream. But the settlement grew, slowly and carefully, into something real and lasting. 2 years after Zane had found Grenna eating bark in the forest, they stood together on the ridge overlooking the valley. Below them, Haven Valley was alive with activity, fields green with growing crops, smoke rising from multiple chimneys, children of both races playing together without seeing difference as threat. "Did you ever imagine this?" Grenna asked, leaning against him. "No," Zane admitted. "When I found you, I was just trying to help someone who needed it. I never thought it would lead to all of this." "Would you change anything?" He thought about the question seriously. Their life was not easy. There were still tensions, still moments when the old hatred surfaced. There were human villages that saw Haven Valley as an abomination, orc clans that viewed its residents as traitors. They lived with the constant knowledge that they might have to defend what they had built. But when he looked at Grenna, at the life they had created together, at the community that had grown around their simple choice to see each other as people rather than enemies, he knew his answer. "I would not change a single moment," he said. She smiled, her tusks catching the sunlight, and kissed him. Below them, the valley continued its daily rhythms, a small pocket of hope in a world still learning to heal from old wounds. As autumn approached again, Grenna came to Zane with something in her hands, a small carved wooden box. He recognized it as one of her winter projects from the previous year, though he had not seen what became of it. "I made something for you," she said, and there was an uncharacteristic nervousness in her voice. He took the box and opened it. Inside were 2 rings, carved from dark wood and polished smooth. Orcish symbols were etched into one, human designs into the other. "In my clan, when 2 people choose to become permanent partners, they exchange rings," Grenna explained. "The rings represent the binding of 2 lives into one path." "I know humans have similar customs." "They do," Zane said softly, staring at the rings. "I want to bind my life to yours," she said. "Officially, in a way that honors both our cultures. Will you accept my ring and give me yours?" He looked up at her, at the vulnerability in her amber eyes, at the courage it took to ask this question in a world that said their love should not exist. His answer was wordless. He took the ring with human designs and slipped it onto her finger, then held out his own hand for her to do the same. She placed the ring with orcish symbols on his finger, and they stood holding hands, the rings catching the light. "We should have a ceremony," Zane said. "Invite everyone in the valley, make it official for them too." "You are not worried what people will think," she asked. Everyone here already knows we are together. This just makes it formal, he grinned. Besides, any settlement we founded together deserves to celebrate its founders getting married properly. She laughed, bright and joyful, and pulled him into a kiss that tasted like happiness and hard-won peace. The ceremony happened on the first day of autumn, when the leaves were just beginning to turn. They held it in the large clearing, with all of Haven Valley's residents in attendance. Vara officiated, speaking words in both orcish and human tongues that bound Zane and Grenna together as partners, as equals, as two people choosing to face life as one. When it came time to exchange vows, Zane spoke first. I found you eating bark and starving, and you looked at me like I might kill you, but you trusted me anyway. You have been brave every day since, braver than any soldier I ever served with. You have built this life with me, and you have made me believe that peace is possible. I promise to stand with you, to protect what we have built together, to love you for all my days. Grenna's voice was steady when she replied. You could have walked away. You could have left me to die, but you chose kindness when you had every reason to choose hate. You have given me a home, a purpose, and a love I never thought I would find. I promise to stand with you, to work beside you, to fight for the future we are building, and to love you with everything I am. They kissed as the community cheered, and that night they celebrated with food and music, orc drums blending with human fiddles to create something new and beautiful. That winter was gentler than the first had been. Their cabin was warm, their stores were full, and they were surrounded by friends who had become family. Zane and Grenna spent the long evenings planning for the spring, more crops to plant, another cabin to build, perhaps even a proper meeting hall for the community. One night, as they lay in their loft with the fire crackling below, Grenna placed Zane's hand on her stomach. He looked at her questioningly, and she smiled. There is a new life growing, she said softly. Part you, part me, something that has never existed before. He stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she was saying. You are pregnant? Yes. 1,000 emotions crashed through him: joy, fear, wonder, uncertainty. Is that possible? I mean, I know it is possible because it is happening, but I thought, so did I, she admitted. But apparently the old stories are true. Humans and orcs can have children together. It is rare, but it happens. Are you scared? He asked. Terrified, she said honestly, but also happy. This child will be proof that our two peoples can create something together, not just destroy each other. He pulled her close, his hand still resting on her stomach where no change was visible yet. We will protect them, he promised. They will grow up in a world that is better than the one we knew. We will make sure of it, she agreed. The pregnancy progressed through the winter and into spring. The community rallied around them, offering help and advice in equal measure. The elderly human woman who had joined them the previous year had been a midwife in her old life, and she checked on Grenna regularly, pronouncing her healthy and strong. As Grenna's belly grew, so did the community's excitement. This would be the first child born in Haven Valley, the first physical embodiment of what they were trying to build. In late spring, as the first crops were beginning to sprout, Grenna went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, and there were hours when Zane feared he might lose her. But she was strong, far stronger than he had ever imagined, and when the sun rose the next morning, a baby's cry filled their cabin. The child was a girl, with green-tinted skin lighter than Grenna's but darker than Zane's, with tiny tusks that would grow more prominent as she aged. She had Grenna's amber eyes and Zane's dark hair. She was perfect. What should we name her? Grenna asked, exhausted but radiant as she held their daughter. Zane thought about everything they had been through, everything they had built, everything this child represented. Hope, he said. Her name is Hope. Grenna smiled. Hope Keller, I like that. The community celebrated the birth with a feast that lasted 3 days. People brought gifts, hand-carved toys, soft blankets, preserved fruits. They took turns holding the baby, marveling at how she represented the impossible made real. As the years passed, Hope grew strong and healthy. She learned to walk in the valley's fields, chasing chickens and laughing with the other children who had been born in Haven Valley. She spoke both orcish and human tongues fluently, moving between them without thought. She learned her father's stories and her mother's traditions, and she created her own blend of both. More mixed children were born over the years. The valley grew to 50 residents, then 75, then 100. They built a school, a proper meeting hall, a small market where traders who did not care about old prejudices could come to exchange goods. Haven Valley became known across the frontier, sometimes with hatred, sometimes with hope, but always with recognition that something new was happening there. Zane and Grenna grew older together. Gray appeared in Zane's dark hair, and Grenna's green skin developed fine lines around her eyes from years of smiling. They worked side by side in the fields, played with their grandchildren when Hope grew up and had children of her own, and served as leaders and guides for the community they had accidentally founded. One autumn evening, many years after that day in the forest when he had found her eating bark, Zane and Grenna sat on their porch watching the sunset. The valley was peaceful, filled with the sounds of people finishing their day's work, children playing, life being lived without fear. "Do you ever think about that day?" Grenna asked. "When you found me?" "Every day," Zane said. "I think about how close I came to just walking away, how my whole life turned on that one decision to take your hand and say come." "I think about it too," she said. "How I almost ran instead of trusting you. How everything good in my life came from that moment of choosing to believe in kindness." He took her hand, their rings clicking together softly. After all these years, the wood had been worn smooth by constant wear, the symbols almost invisible now. "I would make the same choice," he said. "So would I," she agreed. They sat together as the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Around them, the valley settled into evening, the lights in cabin windows flickering to life one by one. In the distance, they could hear Hope calling her own children in for dinner, her voice carrying clearly through the clear air. "We did something good," Grenna said softly. "Against all odds, against everything we were taught, we built something good." "We did," Zane agreed. "And it will outlast us. Hope will carry it forward and her children after her. This place will exist long after we are gone." "That is a good legacy," she said. "The best legacy," he corrected, pulling her close. "But you were always the best thing I ever had." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched night fall over Haven Valley, over the home they had built together, over the future they had made possible by choosing love over hate, trust over fear, and hope over despair. In the valley below, life continued in all its messy, beautiful complexity, human and orc, working and living and loving side by side, proving every day that a better world was possible if you were brave enough to reach out your hand and say come. And in that small cabin on the hill, surrounded by everything they had built, Zane Keller and Grenna lived out their days in peace, knowing that the choice they had made on that autumn day so many years ago had changed not just their lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. Their story became legend in Haven Valley, told to children as they grew, the story of the retired soldier who found an orc girl eating bark off the trees, who took her hand and said come, and who proved that even the deepest divides could be bridged by simple human kindness and the courage to see people as people, not enemies.